listening to In-Fisherman Storyline, North America's top voice in multi-species freshwater angling. Here is your host, Thomas Allen.
Well, let's kick her off, Mark.
Yeah.
Mark Fischer, who is a Minnesota Hall of Fame inductee. Are you a part of any other Halls of Fame?
National Freshwater.
Yeah, you're kind of a legend, as I've been learning.
I try to stay away from that stuff. No, it's all good.
Yeah, Mark Fischer has had an impact on the industry. I've known about him. We've been in some similar circles, but I don't think we spent a lot of time together.
Never did.
Yeah, so we're gonna kind of break each other in here today, and I want some stories. But I think you're widely known as I guess for a long time the face of Rapala, or a long time employee. I want to hear about that, but
Sure.
I don't want to get the cart too far in front of the horse either. So let's start with I'm going to have you reach way back here. Your first encounter with a fish. Can you remember that?
With the fish.
With a fish. The one that you remember the most, maybe.
Yeah. You know, I think I honestly have to say the first true encounter was after getting the seed planted. Classic family Minnesota vacation. Go up to up to Alexandria. Go to Lake Ida. 2 weeks at a resort, and we did that every year. It was just the coolest thing growing up. You knew what was ahead of you. Worked it in with Little League baseball schedules and that whole classic routine. And I fell in love immediately the first trip up. And all we did was we dragged stuff around. Mm-hmm. You know, we were trolling Rapalas, you know, classic floaters and doing pike. My dad loved catching pike. He was from Texas. My mom was up here, didn't spend much time in a boat. And
did you have a boat early on?
No, everybody back then in the 50s, a family was lucky if they had a 5-horse Johnson back in those days, or Evinrude. And you just had that in a case, threw it in the trunk of your car, little gallon of Cass, coffee can to bail the old cedar strip out, and really a small tackle box, and away you go.
You rented a boat at the resort or something like that? That was the norm.
That was the norm, yeah. Whether we fished around home, you know, in the Twin Cities area, yeah, everybody had boats to rent. And, so that was pretty much...
You know, I don't think that's a thing as much anymore. I mean, you can sure rent a pontoon, or I know that there's places here on Gull that rent out those wavy, you know, the wake boats and things like that. And I guess, to me, that's a little bit scary, you know, because you have people that maybe don't have experience driving a great big boat that makes a big wave.
True.
But renting the fishing boat thing, that doesn't, I don't know when that went away, but it sure isn't a very common thing anymore.
Yeah, I think those almost kind of went away. Well, the resorts still had them. I mean, how many S14 Lunds did you see stacked up on shorelines at resorts, you know, upside down, ready to be taken out for the week?
God, the number of those boats that are available still today. We do a magazine called Kayak Fishing Fun, and I've been intrigued how that hasn't caught on here in Minnesota quite like it has everywhere else. This is a whole nother rabbit trail, but I think the availability of those 12, 14, and 16-foot Lunds, really, you don't need a kayak because those do the same thing.
No.
And they're cheap.
They draft nicely, balance perfectly. You know, a lot of them got modified, you know, front decks out of plywood you had laying around.
That's what I did.
Oh, yeah.
One of my earlier boats, it was probably my second or third boat, was a Lund. It was a 16-foot Lund, and I completely gutted it. And I think there was probably a rectangle this big to the end of my table of the floor. Everything else was storage, and I had a front deck, and I had a live well put in it, and I never should have sold it, Mark. To this day, I regret it.
No. You know, all those boats had so much character. But the coolest thing, as you get older, you realize how much you learned by getting familiar with the jigsaw again, or whatever it took. Learn how to wire bait. I mean, all those things that you carry with you today to help troubleshoot a bad situation when you're on the water. You know, it's just amazing.
It was proving grounds.
Yes, it really was. And I admire these young kids today that I've helped a few out over the years, where you just give them an old flasher and you give them something, just someday pay back another kid.
That's right.
And no, it's a blast. And then you watch them and you see them at the ramp a week later. They've got something else on the boat, but they're just modifying.
Well, I think it's important to have. To me, it's a rite of passage to have a crappy boat. To have something that needs work, or you got to pull all the guts out, pull the carpet off, whatever it is, and kind of earn your stripes, if you will, when it comes to getting to a better boat. And I do have a friend. His first boat was a full-on brand new bass boat.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can do it, do it. But there's something important about those early days of making something junky work.
Exactly.
And you talked about the Alex area. What another proving ground, right? Like you could really learn how to catch fish there.
Yeah, you do. I mean, still today, two of my extremely favorite areas to fish are the Brainerd Lakes areas, hands down, and the Alexander area, along with throwing in the Mississippi River, different areas, stretches, and going up to Canada, Minnesota border, and fish Rainy. I love it up there.
I've never fished Rainy. That has been the Rainy River in the spring. I was just talking with Anthony Kleinwachter, who's on the Eskimo staff. He and I went to Saskatchewan this last week together, and he does that every year. And he's like,
"Oh, cool!
You need to go. You need to be there." I'm like, I need to make time to do it. It sounds like it's amazing.
There's not many people up there
really
fishing it.
Yeah. And
you can go up there. Some of the biggest pike I've ever caught up there practicing for a smallmouth tournament on the river. And, it's just those creeks flow and they dump in, those smaller rivers dump into the Rainy River, and these big pike just stage themselves. And you can just see the spots where you're going to catch one. And it's just amazing. Went up there with a super shad wrap one day and had the time of my life. It's just crazy.
It is. This entire part of the world. I mean, you've been all over the country, all over the world fishing. I've spent a lot of time east to west, north to south, and this is still, even though it's home, I still consider it among the best fishing on the planet.
It is, and you're right. I've been fortunate to fish a bunch of different species of fish in different areas. And I thought for sure going to Europe, I would probably get in some really cool big giant pike stuff and some big zander. Fished a lot for them, but it.
Did you catch anything impressive over there?
Yeah, we've the closer we got east to Russia, river fishing. So much is the time of the year, and as we all know, there are different phases where things just explode, and it's just like lights out. And experienced a few of those, but hardly ever to get duplicated.
Yeah,
it was just amazing. But the lakes look right. It looks the fins. I would have the fins come here for meetings, or the company did, and we'd run up to Rainy, and the guys are like, "Why are there no zander? Why are there no zander? It looks just like the Baltic Sea." And which Rainy Lake and Woods, they all do. And but it's like, oh, we need smallmouth in the Baltics, and it's like, yeah, you do. Can't argue, muskies and all.
For some reason, though, there's not that part of Europe. I don't know if it wouldn't sustain muskies. Maybe it would, and maybe they tried. I don't know, but I would think there has to be some reasonable water over there.
Yeah, and I would think they're not that much of a purist mindset that they wouldn't introduce and have success with it and enjoy it, because there's plenty of pike fishermen over there.
Yeah,
that's really is a favorite.
Well, and you look at the way the bass has been kind of passed around the world. The largemouth in Africa, Japan, the Japanese anglers are renowned as some of the best bass fishermen on the planet.
Sure.
And they got those fish from us.
Oh yeah.
So I would think there's a way to do it.
There would be. I know the guys that around the office used to try and lobby to get zander.
Right.
Like it would be wonderful in Lake Pepin. Perfect conditions. Deep water situations, river systems, but could never get an ear.
Well, so there is a lake in North Dakota that has them still, right? I'm not sure the name of it.
Can't recall, but Yeah.
You hear about one getting caught every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this. I bet the stocking has stopped. They probably aren't continuing
Yeah.
to do it, but that would. It'd be fun if you could have. And if it, the thing with the river system is I could see how that would impact downstream and
Sure.
where they would go through the dam. I could see if there is an argument to be made how they wouldn't want that. But I would think some lakes around here, the North Dakota concept, just a few places that are exclusive, right, where there's no in and out flowages,
Correct.
where let's make that lake a Zander Lake and see how it goes.
Yeah, designate them and give them a whirl. It would be interesting to see how they take off.
The European thing has intrigued me. I would love to catch one of those big pike. And I mean, recently there's been videos on social media of a guy in a kayak with an absurd pike. Who knows? I mean, it had to have been a 35-pounder.
Yeah.
And then you see those Zander that they look like they're 40 inches long almost,
Puffballs.
They would be great.
They
to catch
are.
one.
Well, and even my best fin buddies that are really diehard pike anglers, they go to Norway. So everybody goes further north, just like us here.
Yeah.
It
seems the further north you go, maybe it's the lower pressure, whatever it is, but
Yeah.
they get bigger the further north you go.
No disrespect to my southern buddies, in southern Minnesota, Iowa, but yeah, it seems everybody still has this go north mindset certainly out of the city.
Well, there's certain element of adventure the further north you go. You have to endure more harsh conditions, and getting there is more work. We just went to Saskatchewan on an ice trip for
Cool.
for our ice guides. We need photos and shot some video and stuff like that. So we went to Tobin Lake. With Trails End Outfitters. Barry Prawl there runs a whitetail outfit, but has a cabin on Tobin, and so Mark, it was so cold. Our first night, it was -44. It set a record.
No way. -44.
Yep.
Oh, you were happy to be there.
Oh, it was cold. Well, I think the equipment we had certainly helped. We had the big quilted pop-up shelters and the Eskimo flip over that, has that material where you're taking your coat off and you're sitting there in your boots, your bibs, and a hoodie.
Yeah.
And it's negative, the high was -20.
Oh, gosh.
But, you kind of got to endure to get some of that fishing, and it certainly turned out as you'd expect. But so let's go back to your younger days.
Yeah.
I know that there comes a point, I think, where you want to work in the industry, and that's kind of the heart of this conversation we've been having with all these people over the last couple months, is kind of getting that origin story of where you decided you wanted to make a living working in the fishing business, and a little bit about how that happened. So if you can recall the day you decided.
Yeah. Excuse me. It was, if I were to look back, and I remember talking with certainly Al and Ron over the years. You're sitting out in the boat talking, and you go back, and I would always thank the guys, for what they shared with all of us, because they spilled it all out.
Mm-hmm.
And then as time went on, I really admired that the staff here at In-Fish did the same thing. Some guys were a little more secretive than others, but it was basically that same mentality. We're going to tell the story, we're going to tell the tricks, we're going to tell the tips. And then all of a sudden you hold that in the back of your mind, and I think you start drawing from it a little bit here and there. Certainly in tough conditions, it's like, what am I doing wrong? And I found out years ago that the days when I decided that I wanted to do this a little more and ramp it up a couple notches, it was all about trying to learn more. I'm getting the exposure. Back in the 70s, you'd pick up magazines like crazy, and you'd read every one of them cover to cover. I'd clip out articles. I would build up a scrapbook like I was doing a doctorate's, and it was just crazy. And you had so much pent-up energy to try and apply what you just learned that Saturday morning on TV. And you would go back, and you'd have to wait 3 months to apply it.
Yeah.
We'd run outside, and it's still ice. It's just like right now. It's it's January, February, March, and then things got better. You could you could apply it. You'd go out and buy the baits. I mean, it was certainly take this hand and this hand, connect them, and say you're going to go out and buy the baits you saw today.
Mm-hmm.
That convergence marketing approach, which was wonderful. But yeah, and it was after catching my first 5-pound fish ever, and I was over on Bay Lake, right in front of the Church Island service area, and we were up there. My folks had a cabin up there, and I caught that 5, and I looked at it, and I went, "There's more of these in lakes than I'm aware of. I got to catch another one," and that was it. And at that point, I remember going and buying a different boat, and I just became a student.
Mm-hmm.
I think is the best way to describe it, because at that point, I was young. We had just gotten, my wife and I had just gotten married, starting a family, doing all that stuff, and I knew that that's what, somehow, some way, I was going to afford myself the opportunity to get involved in a bigger way, because I finally applied what I had learned, and it all came together.
It clicked.
It just was like you start dodging the sky. You know, you're thinking lightning bolts or a ta-da moment or whatever. Call it what it was, but it was really a cool deal. It was really a cool deal, and that was it. And from there, I mean, I went through my tackle boxes and reorganized and changed hooks and modified colors, and I was always an art guy. And in fact, that's what I was planning on doing for a career, was going into art education. And I had some great teachers in school, and they were really role models. And yeah, so I applied that. And
So you're like in high school or okay.
high school,
teacher.
I had some great teachers.
Cool.
And but they were regular guys, you know. Dan Craig was a gymnast. Don Quam was an old vet. Just great people, but they had personalities that you kind of gravitated to, and it's like, okay, so they're creative and they can do all this stuff, and they're great people. I like that, you know. So that was kind of a.
Did you go to college for that?
I went to college for about a couple months, and then started playing in rock and roll bands for a few years.
Okay.
I could not do it. I couldn't sit still long enough. I'm sorry,
Mark. I can relate to that. My first year out of high school, I went to a community college, and I got through one semester and had some 2-point-something GPA. Was barely hanging by a thread. Second semester started, and then turkey season kicked off. I'm like, wait a minute.
See, you became victim.
I was like, I can't do this. And I tried. I went back to two other schools and never did graduate. I got a degree from the School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah. You know, and funny you say that, because I think a lot of us that learned from the School of Hard Knocks applied themselves maybe more than my other buddies did that were probably smarter than I.
Well, you had to. I mean, if you wanted to be successful, you had to get hard-nosed about it.
Absolutely. And some of my greatest friends that have been successful today, or over the years, are ones that maybe never completed college, but they just grabbed the bull by the horns and went for it. And I can't tell you how many friends in life, I don't want to make this an example for anybody that's going to watch this deal, but how many of them went to school to be whatever and ended up doing something not even close, and were extremely successful.
Mm-hmm. There's a point, and I think this is true. It was true then. It's true for me. It's true today. That there are directions you can go that work, and this is going to work, and that's going to work. You just got to decide, I'm going to turn right or turn left at this fork in the road, and just take the bull by the horns and go. If you want to be a doctor, you need to spend 6, 7, 8 years in college. If you want to drive a truck, you don't have to, but you can make the success grow within whatever that dream is, right?
That's true. That's very true.
I've been preaching that to my son. I don't think he's cut out for college. I mean, he's got a work ethic like no other kid I've been around. Again, patting myself on the back with my kids because I'm proud of them. Everybody knows I do that.
Well, sure.
But I know that his future is bright because he knows what it means to get his hands dirty and work hard.
Right.
And I don't care if it's fish slime, if it's newspaper ink. I don't care what it is. You get in and you become a part of the process.
Yeah, and the world needs great carpenters, electricians, and plumbers. We need them.
You want to make some money right now?
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of scoffed at this. I've said, you ought to consider being a plumber. He's like, I'm not plunging people's toilets. I said, I get that, but there's other parts of being a plumber.
New
and
construction works.
Make a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. No, it's good. But there are opportunities, and I think I was lucky. I was lucky in life to be surrounded by good people, good family values, being brought up correctly.
Mm-hmm.
My family today, I have 2 beautiful daughters, and they're women. I mean, they're in their like 40s, and it's like, wow, where did this time go?
It's right before your eyes.
It's crazy.
I mean, my wife and I joked about this last night. You know, we have my son's going to be a senior next year. My daughter is going to be a junior, and she's this amazing skier, and she loves to fish. Tommy loves to fish, bought his first boat this year. Like, there's all of these things happening that it's like we were just changing diapers, it seemed like last week.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah. Yep. So that was the fish that pretty much did the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And
were you were in this area when that excuse me, you were in this area when that occurred. Did you have a direction kind of shortly after that, or was it, I'm just going to figure out a way to make fishing a career? Did you have a plan? Sometimes that happens.
Yeah, no. You know what I lived by was I always wanted to share things that made me happy.
Mm-hmm.
I think in life, whether it was playing baseball as a kid or doing whatever. You learned something when you were building something with your bike. I mean, all these possessive things we had growing up, you took care of them. Mm-hmm. You got your first 22. I mean, that thing was oiled and polished and ready to go at any time. I mean, my parents instilled that in me, that if you were fortunate enough to have something, that you take care of it. Mm-hmm. You know where it is. You didn't just take your sunglasses off. You put them in a place you'd come back to, that type of a lifestyle. And I admire that. And I think what happened is when I realized that, and I recall that the weed line on that break had changed where I caught that big fish. I mean, I have been a mid to deep water fisherman from that day forever, just because I love watching what's in front of me, what's under me, and work structure. Mm-hmm. And I remember that's what I saw. I remember watching it, reading it. The guys I admire that I would call my mentors, and they truly were. And it all played out. So from that point, it was. I lived with I kind of lived with the adage of prepare yourself when opportunity knocks. I had heard that somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, I can do that. Nobody will be more prepared than I if something comes up that I'm really drawn to. And what happened was that's when I had no idea, but all this tinkering with lures and trying something different, not being afraid to change. That was really it. And by having a reasonable understanding of use of color and knowing colors and how they mix, well, the role of a bait, you're doing nothing more than sticking a stir stick in a paint can and mixing 2 colors together. That flash of a bait rolling from back body to belly is like stirring a paint can.
Well, you said you really appreciate even still fishing the deep weed edge or fishing that structure. I mean, there's no better place to really illustrate how a lure is going to attract a fish to me than like a weed edge. Mm-hmm. Of course, punching shallow water, flipping a jig, that all has its application, has its place. But if you're fishing a long weed break, you need to find where those fish are concentrated at, right? And you need to have a reaction, and you've got to have that lure working around that structure effectively.
Right. And I remember following that brake line, and all of a sudden it turned in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, okay, this is a change. So I followed it with the boat, and all of a sudden it turned back and kicked me back out. And I went, this is like a pocket, you know. Sure as heck was, you know. And yeah, it's amazing. So from that time I was a firm believer on inside corners.
Yeah, me too.
Turns. I mean, just go to it. Find the point, find the corners.
And they're on rivers, they're on reservoirs, they're in lakes, the inside turn, right? That's just a classic spot to find fish.
It just is. So that was it. And so the tinkering began. And I modified and tweaked, and I was flipping jigs in, you know, that plastic stuff that you dip pliers into.
Yeah.
I was dipping jig heads instead of painting them because it stayed on longer.
Stayed on longer, like the grippy handle stuff.
Yeah.
No kidding.
And I was mixing colors together so I could get a brown and get a green, because there were the primary colors. It came out in yellow, it came out in red, and it came out in blue. Those are the three primary colors. I just held 4 fingers up. Those are the 3 primary colors. And yeah, so it was like everything I like to do is easily around me. How do I get this together? Well, I kept working hard at learning how to make jig skirts and spinnerbait skirts and playing with hard baits and what makes a bait do this. And I would study and fill the sink with water. And yeah, it was great. I'd do it all again. I absolutely would do it all again.
I want to make a connection here. You said something that's intriguing to me, and you said you played in rock and roll bands for a while.
Yeah.
What'd you play?
Drums.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't generally talk about this very much, but I grew up in a very musical family, and by default I learned guitar and bass guitar, and I've played a lot in my college days.
Cool.
And I feel like there's a connection here that it didn't dawn on me till you said this, but there's something, you can practice on your own, you can kind of jam by yourself, you can work on your craft, right? But until you're with the band, it doesn't all come together.
Right.
You really have to have everybody together, and then there's just this, it's almost an inexplainable aura, right? You're together and you're all, it's one of the best feelings in the world. And I don't play like I used to. I kind of miss that, but when you're all together, you're sharing that effort to make the one goal come true, the song, everything come together. You all have to be on your game.
Right.
It's the same in fishing.
It is.
Where it's not the same unless you're sharing it with somebody. You said that it's having people there with you, but then if you're into the bait modification and there's that connection of, hey, I put this finish on this jig and I caught a bunch of fish on it, you're like, oh, I'm really onto something. And then you share that with somebody in a boat where you maybe have both collectively worked on an end product, or you come together and you have people that have the same objective, the same passion, and it takes that experience and makes it something that's so much better than if you were by yourself.
Exactly. Sharing good days and bad days are always better.
It's easier to suffer through something when you got someone to suffer with.
Oh, if you got exactly. Well said. But that brought up something else, and I think playing an instrument, the only way you get better is practice. Practice. And practice and practice. And if you want to be better than the guy who's occupying first chair, you got to practice more than he does or she does. And that's the only way you're going to get it. It's you have to learn to really apply yourself.
There's a purity in that advancement, right? Like you don't just accidentally make it up to first chair. You have to outperform.
Yeah.
If you want to catch fish better than the next guy, you better be on the water.
And there's a lot of good anglers, and I knew there were a lot of good drummers. And if I was going to bust into that music scene, I better do something. And the other part was too, it taught me early in life, when I would watch somebody play or listen to somebody play, and I learned one thing in 4 hours of watching, if it was in a bar situation or a concert. If I learned one thing that made me that much better. Now, how can I expand that?
Mhm.
You know, take a tip. You know, it's like fishing. Don't steal the spot from the guy. Just understand what he's doing and go up, find it yourself in another place and apply yourself.
I couldn't have said that better. What a great comparison.
You know-
There's a lot of that in fishing today.
Oh.
In the
Yeah.
my son fishes in the high school
Sure.
SATT here, and that's a great opportunity. But I see this all the time where. Even in the tournaments I fish, I know you've seen it too. You get call them, hole pirates. They come in and take your spot or whatever. But to me, I want to know what someone was doing over there. But more often than not, Mark, I was not able to catch fish on their spot if I went in there
Right.
anyways. So you still got to apply and do it somewhere else.
Still, to me, no disrespect to anybody,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the dumbest things I still do not understand today, it was, why would you try to find the spot and what the person was throwing and go and throw the same identical thing in their spot?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, you're not going to fish like that person did. And number two, he's going to come back and fish it that way. So what else works? And that's how you learn about comeback baits, or what to go first with, what to go second with, and how it works out. It was like years ago, before I got into the fishing business, I was in the sign business, North Minneapolis, and did 4 years of serving my apprenticeship. I was around color all the time, tweaking, modifying. There you go again. So I would have all the scrapyard guys on 2nd Street. Those guys were all, and people that hear that are going to know what I'm saying. And they were the sheenies, they were the junkyard guys, they were the salt in the earth and the backbone of good old North Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys would come by. You had to cut them a deal because they've been there forever, or you're not going to get their business. And they would say, "Oh, I need a new sign. Okay, what would you like? I want it red and white so it stands out." And I'd go, before we go any further, let's go outside. How about a yellow and blue? No. You get them outside in the sidewalk and you'd go, every sign down North 2nd Street is red and white. And you want to stand out with a red and white sign? Put a different color in there and they're going to see you.
Mm-hmm. Contrast, standing out.
Different.
Well, and that would kind of apply to a fishing lure, a for sales, but also for the fish swimming in the water.
Right.
Back to your point about the spot thing. This is something I learned when I was working at Bass that I really appreciated about Mike Iaconelli. He would, after day one, he could be leading a tournament, and after day one would divulge his entire plan. Like, I'm fishing here,
Yep.
I'm using this, here's the color, here's the way I'm retrieving it, blah blah blah. And I asked him once, I said, why are you so willing to share this info right away? He goes, because you still got to get out there and catch them.
Right.
And I'm like, that's advice I've taken, to every tournament I've fished or show that we're filming for, or just going out. Like, you still got to get out and make those decisions. And I know that you get a lot of these. Social media is terrible for this. You have guys that blur out their background, and it's so aggravating because I'm like, I don't even know why people think that they can hone in on someone's juice, go find it and replicate. Like, I don't think that happens.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Maybe, but that fish may not be there. Okay, if it's a big muskie, it could be, but it might be on the other side of the lake for all we know.
Yeah.
To me, I would have a much greater level of satisfaction learning what they did, but then applying that somewhere else and making it work for myself.
Yeah.
That's where the magic is in fishing.
Yeah, it is. And Iaconelli's a great example of it. He is. You picked a good one to talk about. I mean, there's so many good ones to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But working with Iaconelli over the years at Rapala was fun because he thought like we did. And what I mean is not that I think like he did, or you think like Mike does, or I think like you do. It's we've all been exposed to the same thing over here that Mike got exposed to over in the eastern part of our country. He fished smallies. He fished pike. He fished all rivers, lakes, all of it. And he, without going into deep discussions, you could say something to him and instantly would pick it up. And it wasn't BS. He wasn't shining the shoes and selling you.
He was one of the best that I've ever had the chance to work with, and super personable.
Yep.
I just every encounter and experience I had with him working in the business was positive.
Oh yeah.
And I, his energy got the best of him from time to time. There's some funny moments, the old classic yelling at the dog on the shore moment.
Oh, yeah.
I've been mad at a dog too.
Heck yeah. That's where you know you're still red when you cut yourself. You know?
That's right. So I mean, I think that kind of personality, and you're right. There's so many of them, but that's what makes fishing a never-ending puzzle. Is you're continually looking for the next best presentation or finding the spot on the spot. And as you mentioned too, like those weed edges around here, they change year to year.
Oh, they do.
And so you could have the juice one year, and if you have a couple winters like we've had where there's not been a lot of snow cover and the weeds never really died off, it's a totally different lake. And so, but you got to have that thirst, right? You got to want to continue to learn and grow with it.
Yeah, because the fish, I think the longer you fish, you realize that the fish are really more creatures of habit than we ever gave them credit for.
One of the things I think of, and this is of course an impossibility, but if you could live with a bass for a year, I think you'd feel pretty stupid as an angler. Like really know how simple they are and how they're like, I should have known this spot. If there was a way to learn that, of course you got to get out on the boat and go. But
you're so right.
They're simple creatures.
Well, yeah, there are so many V8 moments. I wish I had a V8 that are happening today.
Yeah.
And will happen again loading the boat on whatever body of water I fish, that you go, I was so close years ago. I would see this, but I wouldn't know what to do. I would find out about this, but I didn't know how to react. I have a spot on Rainy Lake that I think guys are just whacking them on, that years ago, the first time I went to Rainy Lake, I fished the spot, caught a couple, but I could never catch them again, ever. And I could still go there today and catch one, and that would be about it. But the guys have so much more knowledge. They have so much more drive. It seems... And they're just plain and simply good. They want it really bad.
Well, they're things that have certainly changed. This is a topic we talk all the time here, but the OG generation, they're retiring, some are passing away.
Yeah.
That group set the stage for our mapping, our technology, like that. This is the natural. If you take a step back and look at history, we're not really that far out of whack with the general curve of fishing innovation.
Correct.
Now it's at a level that makes some people upset. We can talk about forward-facing sonar, but the reality is we kind of set the groundwork, and by we I mean your generation, and then when my generation came in, we've all kind of contributed to that innovation that's got us to this point now. And I think Matt Herron said this to me not too long ago. He's like, I wish they just recognize where it came from. And I think that would alleviate a lot of the
tension.
A lot of tension. And that's a man that's concerned about his legacy, and rightly so, because he did contribute a lot to the flipping world. And he's a titan. But it's easy, and this is the thing that this is the purpose of this podcast, is there are young guys on the high school team here in Brainerd that don't know the name Ray Scott. And I think naturally, being from Brainerd, you think of Alan, Ron Linder, and Doug Stange and In-Fisherman. That's an easy thing to connect yourself here in Brainerd. But if you venture out of the Midwest, those names are not very widely recognized.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's no secret one of my favorite little rivers to fish is Rum. And I'll go over there because there's never that many boats on it. The bite is never that good. But it's a good day out just to see if I'm going to be that one day in 5 years they finally bit, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I'll get up so far. Ron Scherr lives up there. So I'll get up so far, and I'll pick up the phone and I go, Is that cooler in your boat got any beer in it? I need a cool one. So he'll come walking out, and I take my 3 grandsons and my daughter and my son-in-law live down in Tulsa. So when they come up on the 4th of July, we all pile up in the John boat. I got a big 18-footer, and we'll go out and fish. And then we get up close to Ron's place, and I'll call him. So he'll come down to the dock, and we'll talk. And Ron, it almost put a tear in my eye. One day I said, hey, guys, say hi to Ron. Hey, doing the plate thing. And Ron goes, they don't even know who I am. And I just went, okay, they're young, and they may not know because they don't live here. But you could tell it hit. It just hit.
Legacy is important. I mean, legacy, I don't care what anybody says. We all want to leave this business, leave the world, the waters we fish better than we had them. And, that I think better than we had them or better than we received them. There's some room of interpretation there on how that goes. But ultimately, you want your mark left on the world. All of us do. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that's positive. And, you don't, I learned a long time ago when I started in this business, you don't want to burn a bridge. And I really believe in recognizing the people that paved the way, because there's a lot of stories there that we'll never hear if we don't take the time to sit down and talk about it. And again, I don't want to, I'm not going to pat myself on the back with this, but fascinated.
You've been around it.
I've been around it and seen what you just explained. Somebody doesn't know who Ray Scott is or what he brought to this world that we all take for granted. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's my point is I would love it if we can get people to recognize that there are those that came before us that paved the road that we drive on to get to the boat ramp, and that helped create the data or the scenario where the mapping was developed. And we've improved this, we've improved that, so that this learning curve that these kids today enjoy is here because there were guys like you, the guys like the Linders and Doug and everybody that came before them that helped develop that.
Yeah, and the sad thing, I love history.
I do too.
I'm a huge history buff. And I burnt out on ice fishing. I don't want to get off track.
We're fine.
I'm really good at getting off track.
Hey, that's what this is for.
But I burnt out, I would have to honestly say, burnt out on ice fishing. I love pan fishing. And I just hit it hard. And I just fried. So I spend my winters now, I get on and I study Native American cultures from around here, mm-hmm. and learn about other parts of the country and whatever. Anyways, without going too far on that deal, but a lot of young people today don't really care much about history, mm-hmm. any kind of history, and I'm wondering if you learn about history because somebody gave you a tip of the iceberg and just dropped a bone on you and then walked away, or thought because you like to shoot turkeys that if I talk to you about camo, you might go home tomorrow and look at something online about this different type of camouflage or a way of doing so or setting things up, whatever. And nobody's passing on the history thing. And they're trying to rewrite our history books at the same time. And that's a scary, I don't even want to talk any much more about that, but that's a collision course our culture is going to come to, because
if you better recognize history, you're bound to repeat it, right?
How did it get here? Yeah. How did we, I did a little deal with, I got asked by a buddy of mine, a good, solid, love him to death, longtime fishing buddy of mine, a few years older than I, and he asked me if I would mind talking about Native Americans to his homeschooled grandchildren. Mm-hmm. I just did this like 2 weeks ago. It was so fun. His 3 grandchildren are so smart. They were like human sponges. Mm-hmm. They absorbed everything. They had questions. They understood exactly what I was talking about. And never once did they scratch their heads that that Native Americans had to walk in the early years before horses came here from Spain via Mexico, that everything they did, they walked or canoed.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. That was the only modes of transportation. And when I said, so how did they get around? They went lakes and rivers and streams. And I went, well, somebody's been talking to them already, because it wasn't like, how do they move around, you know?
Well, think of that's the early level of innovation. I mean, It doesn't go back to Ray Scott. It goes way beyond that, because there was a time when none of us were here, and their modes of transportation probably largely revolved around water access.
Right, right.
And so their lives were built there. They were naturally probably drawn to the water. We all, I think all of us have an innate need to be near the water to an extent.
Always, always. And even today in fishing, it's like, why was that fish there? First question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you just come through, or what was holding them? And that's what I like about structure fishing, because you find stuff. You know, I'll never forget when 360 came out. It was, I thought this point, and I was following it with the flasher, and I was getting a discernible hard bottom. Weeds would stop, and this hard bottom would continue out this way. And I would crank it, I would Carolina rig it, I would football jig it, I would do everything. And then when I exhausted my efforts, I would leave. First time I got 360 on it, it's like,
wow,
this thing hooks this way.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder going out this way. It almost doubles back. And it's like, I got an old spot that's a new one.
But you don't have the time to go back and look at every single spot you've ever fished. So like all of a sudden, you've got a whole nother lifetime of stuff you got to learn.
Right.
And it doesn't stop.
Right.
You know, there was a day here in Minnesota I still keep a crankbait tied on, and I still use it, even though we're way down the trail of forward-facing sonar. I used a crankbait often as a depth finder to an extent. And okay, I know where it popped free of the weeds and hit that edge, and oh, clunk, there's a rock. Like there were ways to discover structural elements with the lures you were using, and I think tungsten's another good example.
Oh, yeah.
Its ability to transmit bottom hardness almost makes it worth the money, right? There are little things.
I am victim. I have fallen victim to tungsten for that exact moment.
Yeah.
Reason.
Yep. And to me, the size, I don't care so much personally, and you know, prove me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care so much about the size of the weights as I do what you're able to feel with it.
Correct. It's just like what you said about cranking.
Mm-hmm.
I would say 40 to 50% of my cranking, and I used to do it a lot. I don't as much as I do today, but fishing new bodies of water,
something that moves fast.
40% of the time, I'm looking for weeds and what's hooked up on the treble hooks. I'm looking for that silty, mossy stuff that those fish are not going to be around. Get out of there quick, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always about catching fish. It's about what you find with the crankbait.
Mm-hmm.
You are exactly right.
You know, it's funny too. I can't think of many times I've seen KVD slow down and flip a jig. I mean, it happens for sure, but you think about how he covers water better than anyone, and his baits generally work well at a high speed. You can apply different depths. You know, and I still think there's value there. We've heard recently like crankbait sales are down, spinnerbait sales are down.
Yeah,
I think it's an ebb and flow. I think they're going to come back in as time goes on here. As forward-facing sonar is dominating the conversation, it's dominating the market. Therefore, baits that accommodate that the most are also kind of dominating. It's going to change.
Sure,
but you still think about your ability to cover water with a lure that moves quickly. There's a guy here in town, Chad Foster. You recognize that name?
The name's familiar.
He's an excellent stick. He fished the FLW for a few years and has done very well.
Okay.
Fishes a lot of local stuff, but he likes to keep his boat at 2 miles an hour. I'm like, all the time? He goes, yeah. He goes, if you move faster, cover more water, you're bound to bump into more active fish. And it's hard for me because I have a slow down mentality. A lot of times, especially on the weed edge here in like July and August, I like to throw a little worm. And this is to my chagrin. Like I catch fish on it. I don't win tournaments on it. So there's something to learn there. But if you slow down and work something through while you're looking for fish, you're wasting time.
Nope, that's true. Yeah. The thing you said about Van Dam covering water, I was fishing with, I think I was in the boat with Fritz that day because I would working with the guys at Rapala, and going down a few days before the tournament, I could get permission to go ahead and practice with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember fishing with Fritz, and we're cranking some outside piece of structure. Van Dam shut down, and he went right by us, chucking a spinnerbait, tandem willow. And I was amazed at how fast he was through the key spot. When he was definitely looking for something, trying to pattern something.
Mm-hmm.
But the speed in which he presented that bait, it had to have been a 1.5 ounce spinnerbait. I'm thinking because this thing would, you'd think it'd roll on its side at the speed he was moving, but
Well, he always
tracked.
Always said when it comes to lure weight, go with as much as you can get away with, whether that's a worm weight or a crankbait or a spinnerbait. And I think that with his speed of fishing, that made sense.
Yeah, and feel. Yeah,
Right. Just
But
trolling
again-
motor on 10, hauling the mail.
But it's that classic old analogy. It's less is more.
Mm-hmm.
It's the little things that make the biggest difference.
Yep. Not a wasted motion. Everything that guy did has a purpose. And I
Yep.
think that if you can draw anything from watching somebody fish like that, it is the smaller details. It's a focus on the little things that maybe don't necessarily make sense in your pre-fishing discussions, but when you're out there, you're like, the last thing you want to do is tie 4 more baits on. You better have fresh line, or
Yeah.
check your leader, or all the things. The stuff that matters and takes up time. Figure out a way to maximize and make another cast. His thing was, if your bait's not in the water, you're not catching fish. So how do you maximize the in between time?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. I mean, we all did it yesterday, watching BASS going on St. John's River, and
You can waste a lot of the day running too, right?
oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. And who was? I think it was Ricky Clun. Ricky Clun on Saturday made a comment. He goes, "I still can't get over how much time guys spend weighing their own fish.
Yes,
Throw
I saw
it in
that.
the box. Throw the lure back in the water."
You're right.
And it's like, yeah,
That was a clip they pulled out and ran on social media, I think, and I was like, that. I am a little bit old school there, where I don't weigh all my fish.
Right.
But some of the guys that, and I don't know that this is a reason why they win, but the guys that generally win have a good idea what they have. So I don't know what the connection is. I'm still struggling to figure out why they need to weigh everything, but
to me, it's too much to think about. Good for them that they do it and how they do it and their reason why they do it.
I think
it's all good.
I think it's culling, especially with these scales that have the built-in application. Where and the Rapala scale is one of the greatest scales ever made.
That's what they say.
I still use it.
Still going.
Yeah, but you're which one you're going to get rid of. So maybe the time you're making up, rifling through all your fish, maybe that makes up for it. I don't feel like it does. I don't know how you did it, but I like to put the ones I know I'm probably not going to cull on this side, the bigger ones, if I'm lucky enough. And you can ask my friends, I'm the king of the 10-pound limit around here, so it doesn't necessarily matter. But I want to put the ones I know I'm going to cull first together, and so I've only got 3 to sort through instead of 5.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's that, but I do the balance beam too. But that's not accurate. I mean, it is, but it's not. If they're super close, you're giving up ounces if you sacrifice the wrong fish. So,
but what always burns a hole in the back of my head is I don't fish any different to catch a 2.5 pounder as I would to catch a 3.
that's right.
So it's not going to make a difference on my lure selection. So it would be really interesting to get one of those guys to pick up a discussion and find out
what's the real purpose? And I think it would ultimately come back to shortening the culling process. But But even then, I don't know that the amount of time you spend weighing the fish beforehand makes up for that.
or maybe the calming of confidence.
Maybe it's
It's got to help confidence.
Oh, well.
somehow, some way.
Think about the stress that you go through in a tournament. Like if you can calm yourself down, you're going to fish better. That's a fact.
Exactly.
So maybe you're right on there.
I don't know, but
well, let's go into your early Rapala days. This is a part that has intrigued me about you. You had decided that you were going to find a way to make a living here. How did that opportunity present itself?
Mm-hmm. Excuse me a minute.
You're good.
Well, I was working for a very small company owned by Don Link and Mark, and his last name will come to me. Sorry, buddy. But owned a company called Skirts Plus. And a very dear friend of mine and I went to work for them, and they manufactured spinnerbaits, skirts, jig skirts for a lot of the big manufacturers, and manufactured them offshore. And it was a great business, and learned a lot. Don Link was great with colors. He was a partner with Lonnie Stanley and Mike Dias years ago, and they had a company called Dialist, and they were doing the same thing, skirts and things. And they were innovators, big-time innovators. I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people know the name Lonnie Stanley and Mike Dias, and Stanley jigs and Stanley spinnerbaits.
Mm-hmm.
And they were innovators in the sense that they could see something, and they always were not kicking a can down the road. It was like, no, we got to keep doing something different. There's something better. The Stanley wedge blades, tapered on one end, thick on the other. Hard to manufacture, tooling costs, all that stuff, but they built a great product.
Mm-hmm.
And
still
so anyways,
standard today by my count.
Absolutely. And so I learned a lot from Don. Don was a color guy. He was meticulous and one of the most anal guys I've ever met. I mean, there was one way to do it, and nobody was going to beat him to the punch or do it better.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, no matter if you had a product finished and it blew you away, we were never done. It was food for fodder for next year's release. Get on the projects, So it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Then I was talking with a buddy of mine who I had worked with, Tom Mackin. And I worked a lot on the marketing side with some of the companies I was fortunate enough to work with, Minn Kota, Humminbird, and certainly Rapala back in those days. And so through Mac, he asked me one day, he says, "Hey, you ever think of coming to work here?" And I said, "That's me at your door." There was one company I always wanted to work for, and that was Rapala, hands down. I thought they were classic. They were, as Bernie Schultz used to say, one of the best regal brands in the industry. They had work ethics that I could understand. They did things right, and they had all the right things about them. There was no place where they changed things up and substituted, or, they would rather be late with the delivery and to do it right and turn their back on that delivery.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Which doesn't happen today.
Right.
Just doesn't happen. Paint's still wet. It's in the package, not there. So there were so many things that intrigued me. Excuse me. And then the fact that I think it was that classic picture of Lori Rapala. I saw a real one of him, and I think that's what really hooked me. He had a heater out the corner of his mouth, and his fingers were beat up, banged up, broken up, fingernails just a mess, with this knife and he was whittling on this piece of pine bark, and sooner changed to balsa. And I just thought, if it started there and it's still here, they're still doing it that same way. I'm in. So if ever I was posed with the opportunity to go to work for them, I was in. I mean, it was like I'm at your door.
Authenticity mattered.
It really did. There was just something magic about it. And I got to go back to Alexandria for 1 second. Fishing with my dad, we're in the boat and we're trolling. And before we went on vacation that one year, we stopped at the Red Owl in Robbinsdale, bought the groceries to go on vacation, got the green S&H green stamps, and so you guys know you would get premiums, X amount of stamps for X amount of dollars you spent buying groceries. And they would reward you. And then you would go collect all these stamps and you'd go and buy something and redeem it at an S&H trade center. There was one the opposite end of West Broadway from the Red Owls. So we ran down there after getting the groceries. We went to the redemption deal. My dad got a brand new rod, a brand new reel, because the last stop we were going to make is at the Coast to Coast store to pick up the brand new Rapala lure that everybody was talking about. The year was 1963. Never forget it. So we buy this lure, had my dad's name on it, sitting on a shelf, and we run up to Alex. We go out and fish, and my dad said, well, we've caught enough fish here. Why don't you try for a while? Well, all we're doing is trolling. And we go over this weed bed and whack, I get hit. And for a kid, I'm 10 at that point. I whack one and I'm winding on it. And about the next time I get, boom, hit again. What the heck is this? My first time trolling, swear to God, first time trolling a Rapala. I've got 2 fish on the same lure. I had a giant sunfish and a walleye on the tail hook. It was just the coolest thing. And I knew I was snake bit at that point. And I think that was the deal where if I could ever go, and as my time went on, that I was getting hooked into this fishing deal, that was the other end where the knot was tied to work there.
And a Rapala lure that you were able to buy because of the stamps you earned at the grocery store.
Exactly.
I mean, that's authentic.
It was crazy.
That's as good as it gets.
Yeah, it was crazy. So now I told Mac, yeah, I'm in and I'm coming. I will. And what do I have to do? He says, wow, we'll just work with the pros and a lot of the media guys. And I'm going, fine, and work in product development. So I went in and that was it. And it was the greatest place to work. So many classy people, so many smart individuals.
So what was the Finland connection or the overseas connection?
Sure. Finland is where it started. That's where Rapala started, was in a little village called Vasku, and it's probably an hour and a half from Helsinki and up in the north. And the cool thing about that whole deal was the majority of the people were in that village were employed by Rapala, and it just kept growing. So they had workforce and ethics, and they're just skilled with their hands, and had a lot of great people working over there. We, meaning the U.S., as a customer base for that company, I could tell you, because over the years I became very good friends with Jarmo Rapala, who was Lori Rapala's grandson. And he and I worked, I enjoyed working with Jarmo, learned a lot from him. He told me, he learned a lot from me. It was it was fun. It wasn't working. It was like, hey, let's do something cool today. Okay, what? And we'd have a project list, of course, but in the back of your mind, you've always got a hit list of, we've got voids in the arsenal that need to be done. That was the motivator. But the Finland connection, it had the factory. The factory was all set up with tooling that was manufactured by the employees in the building. And I will tell you, and some people will understand what I'm saying, is when Forrest Wood and Nina had Ranger boats, their way of doing business was identical to the Rapala factory. Family structure, family always big, loyalty to people, loyalty to employees, manufacture with pride, and take care of your customer.
Loyalty to quality.
Oh, yeah.
In there, for sure.
Nobody could do it better. It was just gold standard. And with that, they really appreciated the business that they would get. They were blown away when they received their first order. There are stories that I could spend too much time talking about, but it made a big deal. And so everything was manufactured there. We were a distribution facility, and they are still today, a distribution facility worldwide. And when I was there were like 40 distribution facilities around the world. And so we were doing freshwater, saltwater. Something here should better work over in France or the Netherlands or whatever. And it was truly fascinating. And that connection to Finland rang out, and we maintained that. People, here again, you can talk about generations. My generation today, as well as my parents' generation, understood probably what those people in Finland were doing because we were just that far away from World War II. Mm-hmm. Only, X amount of years had passed. Hard work, they understood that. Ethics, they understood it. All those basic things in life. I think that's probably the ringer. The basic things of life meant a lot to all of us back then. So,
and think too, if you're coming off of World War II, there's so much sacrifice that occurred within the family groups for that.
Absolutely.
For that time of life. And I think that probably really made fishing very important.
Oh, it did. It's like, that's what they did. That's how they put food on the table. They were all poor, recovering, a lot of those folks. So,
can you remember, and maybe this, it might even been before your time, but remember what the product line was like then? Obviously the original floater, that's the gold standard, right? But when you started, what were the options you could buy from Rapala?
Well, there was shad wraps, certainly, and skitter pops and husky jerks, super shad wraps, fat wraps, Risto wraps were still there, and jointeds, all jointed baits had just started to happen. And in fact, when I started there, we weren't that far. I think one of the projects was the first jointed plastic Rapala. Mm-hmm. Shad wrap, I should say. Yeah. It's wild.
I can think of when I was in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, we had a Canada trip planned, and we knew nothing. Mm-hmm. I knew how to catch catfish. I knew how to, cast a rod and reel, but we all had your Zebco type spin cast reels and cheap rods, and maybe we got a nice new open face. That was how you used to call that, right?
Yeah.
Spinning reel. And I would go through the catalog, the Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's catalog, and circle lure after lure, and it was all Rapalas because that's all I could think of. And well, this, I don't want to get too far ahead of this. My dad called it Rapala.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I called it. But then I learned that it was Rapala. But that's I want to uncover that in a minute.
Yep.
So hang on with that. And I ordered, I think, probably 6, 7, 8 lures, and that was my summer savings of the previous year to have all those lures, and we would go north and back troll for walleye or pike.
Yeah.
And that was
Absolutely.
my arsenal were the standard floaters, the jointed ones, which, man, did those things catch fish back in those days.
They did.
And I still think they would, but it's almost not a thing as popular anymore. But that was a hot bait. You get the bright orange one or the yellow one
Yep.
or the rainbow trout one or whatever the colors were. But that was my tackle box, was Rapala, a version of the original floaters back in those days.
Right. Right.
And golly, do we catch them.
Well, that just brings to mind so many great stories along with that, because it was what you did. And the fascinating thing about the consumer in Canada is more like the consumer in Europe. The style of baits, the amount of spoons that they use in Europe, they do a ton of spoon fishing in Canada. We virtually use no spoons down here. And yeah, there's some very distinct inline spinners. Another thing, there's just so many wonderful categories of baits that you look back at. Some of the other things about Rapala that was so fantastic in the years ahead of me, preceding, and I had been on their pro staff for probably 15 years before I went to work for them, and worked with the Webbers and great guys. And yeah, my mind is just going. But hitting the high points, their sales meetings were unbelievable. I mean, it was a production. Double screen stages, fly in all the guys from wherever, and the old days. The old days were a little more low key, maybe one screen, but still a huge production, right?
Right.
And then it would be, you'd pull the fabric off your new products for the next year, and it was the addition of 4 colors to a specific lure. That was it for the year. No new baits. You know, business was conducted so differently. Now, when I left there, we were doing probably like 5 with 1 hero bait per year. Every year.
Gosh, and
The hopper was unbelievable.
you know, that's a sideline thing here that we could dig real deep on, and I think there's I'll be real honest. I think there's a almost certain level of corruption in the ICAST best of category type thing. I have no problem saying that. I'm happy to back it up with receipts. However, it seems we've gotten so far down the road of we've got to have a number of new items each and every year that sometimes I feel like we forget about the old standards that paid the bills back in the day.
Well said. I mean, I couldn't say it any better. The deal, I learned a lot about retail. And I learned a lot about the consumer and the perception of retail and the perception of the consumer. And if it ain't new, it's not going to sell. I'm living my life. I'll give you a tip. Not a tip. I'll
Never eat yellow snow. That's a good tip.
There's a good one. I'll tell you something. I retired in 20. 3 weeks later, I'm diagnosed with cancer. Had no idea, right? Knocked me just right off my feet. They put me on a drug, pop a pill every day. It was the latest, greatest. Put fluid around my lungs. The side effects were miserable. Go through it. I still go through it. And then all of a sudden I hit this point where I'm undetectable. No more cancer. Going, all right, this is great. So I'm living life large, going on, doing things like I used to. Then all of a sudden it snuck back. Go back to Mayo, see my doctor, wonderful guy. And he goes, I told you this might happen, but I'm going to tell you, I also told you that I would have a possible backup in case something didn't work. And I said, yeah, you did. He says, do you mind taking a 25-year-old product? And I said, not at all. I go, 25-year product. He goes, it still works. It held the cover of Time magazine as the cure-all. And I said, you're kidding me. He goes, no, this was supposed to be, take this and you will be cured forever. And I'm undetectable again after just a few months of taking this pill.
Boy, there's a road I would love to go down here, but maybe not on this podcast.
You got it. But it's like, dang. Not always the latest is the greatest.
That's right. That's 100% right. And not always the most expensive.
Oh.
Or
yeah.
Or the most cutting edge. Is that not always the right way to go?
And I'm saying that because I lived it. This is first. You're getting it firsthand. And I don't always share that. But I love fishing. I love working on stuff. I love being in the industry, though I'm out of it. I talk to a lot of guys all the time about fishing, and yeah, it's part of your life. You're not going to walk away from it. So the cool thing is, I always thought, and I'll probably drop this and somebody will pick it up and hit a home run, but that there's a room for classics and bring back some of the old stuff that was tried and proven. You can, that's why baseball has singles, doubles, triples, home runs, and grand slams. There's 4 different levels of massive accomplishments for that reason. I think you could do that in the lure industry.
They all matter. They all hold their spot, right? Like you're and just as an example, your single might knock in 2 RBIs. Now, maybe not every time, but in the right case, it will.
There will be that time.
That's right.
It will happen. And, I just think, modifications of old lures, don't try to,
Well, let's talk about the old classic, the Storm Wigglewort, right?
Yeah.
Like, for some reason, that original version of that is one of the all-time great crankbaits.
It is.
And they went to a cheaper manufacturing platform with the molded plastic.
Yes.
Because in the shape, the whoever thought that was a good idea. Now, granted, they're still around, so they obviously work to an extent.
Yeah.
But there is a contingent of anglers that will go out of their way to spend exorbitant amounts of money to buy those old classic balsa Wiggleworts and repaint them. And so you're getting, those baits are probably worth $50, $60 a piece by the time they're done. They're out here throwing them in pike infested waters.
I hear you.
Some reason that OG version was the version to have.
Oh God, where do we? You opened a can of
Let's
worms.
go.
I mean, it's not just Wiggleworts. Take the Wigglewort. When Rapala bought Storm bought fish hooks based on what was available. Mm-hmm. So if you bought a Wigglewort in 047 color, and last year, you'd buy one this year because I need one. Oh, and here's another can of worms. Anglers, and I lived by this, and I would tell management, this is how anglers are. You got to understand who you're dealing with. This is a different animal, okay? You, my friend, Thomas, you go out and buy a new lure when we're done with this. You go out and catch fish with it in the spring. You're not going to tell me. You're going to sit on that and just play it out. Well, a little longer. How many more fish? Does it really work? Is it really this good? And then you find out, yeah, it's your number one confidence bait. But you're throwing it a lot, and you're throwing it way more than other baits. That's a whole nother deal. Mm-hmm. But this one's catching fish. So you don't tell anybody until you have a gathering of a few of your friends and you're having a beer watching a football game, and all of a sudden the moment hits you and you go, I got to come clean. So you turn to me and you go, Fish, you know that bait that I bought the day after you were up here in Brainerd doing this piece? And yeah, I caught the hell out of them this summer. I did. I just did. No way. All of them? Well, there was one color that was outstanding. And then I go, I'm buying one. And the same thing happens to me. I don't tell my buddies. But when I tell somebody, then my buddies will go out and tell all their other buddies. Not me personally, but as an example. It takes 3 years to get a bait to hit its stride. I swear. First day, mum's a word. Second year, you feel bad about it. You tell your buddy. He tells everybody.
And at which point, possibly in the line of manufacturing, somebody thinks, well, this one's selling better than that one. And I've run into this where certain colors are they're the color to have, and they're no longer available because it wasn't a hot seller. And I suppose that cycle had lapsed.
Right.
And you kind of
talk
about a living, breathing animal. So you need to have that information sooner than later to maximize the angler success and the return on the sales.
That's why you got to talk to guys.
Yeah.
And hope. My job was to infiltrate
the angling class.
Get with the enemy.
Yeah.
And get them to squeal. But that's very difficult. You guys know who you are. Where's the camera? Yeah. But I truly believe that's one part of retail that nobody can track. It's just like a lure. You go into a store to buy a lure. You can't find it. It's not on the peg. It's been cleaned out. So now, where do you as a customer go?
Like today?
Where do you go to get it?
Well, either the next retailer or Tackle Warehouse or Amazon or whatever, and you got to have it now. Like this whole generational thing of instant gratification is a real deal, and you need to have stuff right away. Do you remember when Van Dam won those two classics back to back? He won at Louisiana Delta. What was the one before that, or was it after?
Was one of them Oklahoma? No.
I was at both of these. Lay Lake,
yeah.
Okay, so at Lay Lake, he used that Strike King Red Eye Shad, that lipless crankbait.
Oh, yeah, in the grass.
Yeah, back at Beeswax. Remember that?
Yeah.
You couldn't buy that stupid thing. The next year, when he won, he used the little KVD 1.0, 2.0 square bill crankbaits. Same thing. You could go to Bass Pro Shops and not find any of them on the hook. It's like everybody just bought them out.
Right.
So like there's an element of once the word gets out that a certain bait works, everybody's got to have them.
Yeah.
And by God, when they were available, I bought a crap load of them.
Oh, yeah. And that's how it is. But it's either that instant recognition on a bait or it's the guys hold it tight. It's just a weird.
Well, what's changed that is this modern era of professional bass fishing coverage. It's Bassmaster Live. It's whatever it is. We watched this when I worked at Bass. We would watch, and I'm going to use the term the peg, but proverbial the peg sell out during an event.
Absolutely.
You could see when that. Remember the time when the Max Scent flatworm?
Yes.
You could not buy that green pumpkin color. And that was all happening during the St. Lawrence River tournaments. And you could watch those quantities go down during the event.
I would go into Okeechobee for the FLW tournaments and go into Clewiston and go to the Walmart, pick up all my lunch meat and supplies for the week, and because I was going to go out and practice with the guys. And I'd go in there and I'd see end caps made up specifically, four-sided end caps, extensions of Zoom flukes in one color, green pumpkin.
Yeah. Zoom had a fascinating, and this. So let's talk marketing for a second. So the Zoom thing was always a little frustrating to me working in the magazine world because they would never buy any kind of advertising, at least with the organizations I worked with. And they had a great product.
Oh, Eddie Chambers was not... He did it only through the anglers.
Mm-hmm. Well, Strike King did the same thing.
Yeah.
There was a time at Bassmaster where Dave Precht and James Hall, they're like, hey, we're not going to do a whole lot of like Strike King coverage for a while because they're not buying an ad. I'm like, yeah, but they got 27 anglers showing up. We still got to write about them.
Guys.
Their marketing process was successful from their end of things.
Mm-hmm.
They had to, the more brands they put on anglers, the higher the chances of those anglers being successful, and just by default would be covered in the magazine.
Absolutely.
So it was a little different. It didn't work out at the time for the pocketbook at Bassmaster, but it was a good business model.
Right. The other thing, too, is Strike King had all the guys.
Mm-hmm. They had the guys.
They had the guys. Brower was flipping. This guy was doing whatever. I mean, they were all technique specific back then. That was a whole nother period where
you had a guy,
didn't have versatile anglers as we do today. Today, everybody's an assassin at everything.
That's right.
It's wild.
That's an interesting thing that's the learning curve we created, is now you're able to learn things quicker. You can go to YouTube University, I like to call it, and learn something in a matter of 5 minutes or, whatever the case may be. But I still, born and raised upper Midwest, spent 5 years in Alabama when I was at Bass.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, like, the northern brands were not as recognized or accepted there as the southern brands were not as widely recognized and accepted here. I mean, I think we've kind of smoothed that out a little bit. Jeff Gustafson is driving south with the Northland brand on his boat and truck. That's becoming more recognizable. Here, we're like, oh my gosh, every single bait shop in Minnesota, there's the yellow rack of jigs and spinner baits on the hooks. Like, that's just one of the best branded brands out there. Well, Strike King is not it's becoming more prominent here. Mm-hmm. But the one brand that I feel like you could see north to south without any type of like hiccup, and maybe you helped get it there, is Rapala. Rapala is still a strong brand in southern markets. Was that a hard thing to create, or were you a part of that?
Well, we were all a part of it, because as you're watching your retail customers get bigger, and that time from the late 90s through 2000s, every sporting goods store was branching out. They were fighting for customers. There's only X amount of customers out there, but stores kept getting built, and everybody was kind of sitting back going, you know what, there's brick and mortars. I don't know how many buildings can they keep getting, because we're not getting that many anglers. You're watching license tackle or fishing license sales, and they're not increasing. Now they are. I think that's going to peak and valley for a while. But it wasn't until you could buy online that you started to see things squelch a little bit as far as expanding or whatever. But the expansion was good because it afforded us an opportunity to cross over. Mm-hmm. In as much as when they started to go to the coast, we could get a little more of that saltwater business, or penetrate, or attempt to. So for your retail strategies, it was an interesting time. But anglers always knew there was that imaginary Mason-Dixon line that was going to be a hard one to cross. Mm-hmm. And I used to poke the bear with Johnny Peterson, going, Northland tackle?
I think there was a time.
How's that going to work? But you know what? Gussie's a guy.
I think that it'll be interesting to see what plays out in coming months and years with the recent acquisition and moving the factory. But I think it could be a good thing. But I feel like what happened at Northland was they wanted to be a player in the big pond.
Oh, yeah.
For a long time, and that imaginary line of north versus south or whatever kind of halted that. And I feel like they sort of pulled back and decided to be the big fish in their pond. And I think that's really when Northland became I'd say that's the last 8 to 10 years of northern powerhouse.
Right.
They had Bagley in the mix. I think they still do. It was working, but you know, it was not it's not been since the last decade where we've had a strong northern contingent in professional bass fishing circles.
Truly.
You know,
That's true.
Van Dam,
Walleye was covered in spades.
and it was this is a whole nother can of worms. We just had a little over a week ago, Mark Kortz was in here.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about what the walleye world needs to do to change, and a lot. Another can of worms. But you know, Van Dam was a northern angler.
Absolutely.
But I don't feel like he was, I think that was common knowledge, but I don't think he was looked at that way necessarily. He was just a guy that was going to be in every one of these derbies. And I think that northern contingent really started with the Seth Feider, the Johnston brothers. So really in the last 8 to 10 years has that really become a strong, there's some really good sticks in the north.
And I had made the comment years ago because, you know, I've had an opportunity to fish with a lot of those guys, Sturgeon Bay events. And, you know, we'd finally get to see our Canadian buddies that we would see in July and August, finally in the spring of the year. And so many good anglers and good guys for the sport. That's the other thing. Van Dam positioned himself where he was just a great ambassador for fishing, and not only being just a monster on the water, but yeah, a lot of things changed. But I remember in product development meetings, we would talk about strategies and where we're going to go, and it's like, okay, we got to watch this thing that's developing down here. FLW is still in the mix. BASS is in the mix. We got to keep an eye. Their foot is the pedal. Their foot's on the pedal, and they're going. So
not just for baits, but innovations across the board.
Everything.
Boats and electronics.
Absolutely.
Rods and reels and
And those guys that are working as pro staff, ambassadors, whatever, that are working with us are working with the trolling motor companies, the electronics, the boats, the engines, you know, all of it. This is one big happy group of very successful people trying to do the right thing. That's what's happening. When they break in and they start coming up north and migrating from New York, from those smallie fisheries, and start coming across, or just introduce more smallie events, this thing's going to explode. We got to keep an eye on that. And yeah, and everybody did. I think everybody in the industry did.
Well, those, you know, especially the Waddington, St. Lawrence River experience. What was fascinating to me is how few people live there compared to how many people came out to those events. Like, it was thousands of people.
Really?
And I think that, we all knew.
That would be cool to see.
That was just, same with Sabine River. You know, there's really not a lot down in that part of
populace.
Texas. Yeah. But you know, when you bring the best in the world to these fisheries, you're going to see some fish that you've always heard about but never seen. So I think that one of the greatest successes of Bassmaster, and again, can of worms, we'll be careful here. What keeps Bassmaster relevant, what keeps Bassmaster at the top of the heap, is that there are still fish at the weigh-ins, and people come to see the fish. And first and foremost, they come to see the fish. The anglers that are their heroes, that's a byproduct of being able to shake hands, get an autograph, that kind of thing. But the fish are what draw people in to experience the event. And I think that wherever you live, north, south, east, or west, there's something attractive about seeing a big green slimy fish in person that you just can't get on the
You
TV
got
screen.
to. That's what's under my dock. I mean, you've heard it all.
Yeah.
Over the years, it's like, they're in my lake, that size of fish. And
A live well full of 6-pound smallies live in this river.
Yeah. I mean, that generates people to buy a fishing license.
It does. It's motivation.
I'm sorry, a computer doesn't do it.
No, and it gets us through though, right? It's kind of creates the false satisfaction, and this time of year, I mean,
it's a fix.
It is a fix.
It's
I'm
a
not even
late fix.
I'm not even involved anymore, and I still had Bassmaster Live on the last couple of days. Like, man, you do kind of miss the energy, but There is a culture, and I think this is really what's opened up. I think for a long time, the fishing community assumed that the SEC part of the country was bass fishing only, and that the rest of us just kind of wanted to dabble.
Yeah.
But as doors have opened, northern anglers have gotten involved, and we've visited northern fisheries that while we're different to an extent, we may sound a little different when we talk. We all have the same level of desire flowing through us.
It bounces the same.
Yeah,
it just pumps.
You can talk the language to somebody in South Carolina and Wisconsin and Southern California to Vermont. We're a group of people that love the sport of bass fishing and all fishing, for that matter. We can all relate to it.
That's true. Yeah, it's wild. It's wild. I hope it never goes away, because what you and I and others have experienced, there's no adrenaline push or rush or sensation greater than preparation for that next day to go fish.
You know what I've also learned too is that after a tremendous ass kicking, I might need to go to bed that night and lick my wounds, but I wake up in the morning refreshed and ready to go again.
Oh yeah. I used to always say my motive, my line of motivation was always, my best day for product development was my worst day on the water. What did I do? What didn't I see? What didn't I put together? And
did you shoulder that before you blamed the bait? Was it, what
always.
did I do wrong? Always? Mm-hmm.
Always, because I'm smarter than that piece of wood I'm holding in my hand. I hope.
We hope.
I hope.
Oh, all right. I want to put to bed the age-old question.
Yeah.
Is it Rapala or Rapala?
Okay. The Finns roll their R's, throat deep, Rapala. Okay. We call it Rapala. Out east, it's Rapala. And I've even heard it, there's so many different ways. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares as long as you spell it correctly and buy it.
That's pretty easy to spell it.
Yeah.
So my dad will still say Rapala.
Yep.
There was a video that I bought, and it was a VHS tape I bought from a Walmart that was kind of the story of Lori Rapala, and they all referred to it as Rapala. It may have been an In-Fisherman production. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But
it was. That old piece, but it was done up here.
Yeah.
So we all say Rapala.
We say Rapala here. Okay.
Yeah, but Rapula, you hear it once in a while too, and it's like, where's that U? But
well, I know some
whatever.
of the pros that fish this weekend say Rapala. I mean, so it's kind of ingrained into the culture there of what it was.
It pretty much is with the anglers.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're exactly right. Yeah.
But nobody cares.
Nobody cares. No.
So one of my all-time favorite Rapala baits, and to this day, I still have impressive collection, is the DT series.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the greatest crankbaits ever built.
It was.
They definitely don't handle being hit on a bridge or a stone piling as well as I guess a guy would like. But I mean, nothing does. I have a couple I've kept in my collection that I've, if they get broken, I keep them just because they mean a lot to me. But that was my introduction to crankbait fishing, was with the DT10.
Was it really? Yeah.
I love that crankbait.
In respect to all other manufacturers of crankbaits, then there's plenty of good ones. I will say that was a Fritz deal all the way, and probably the finest crankbait family made, because I remember when we built those baits, it was all about creating the best crankbait for the depth and why you would use it at that specific depth for that time of year was pretty much the deal.
Was there any motivation from the? And I'm just reaching here, but I'm curious with the way the original wiggle warts were made from balsa.
Plastic.
Were they originally made from plastic? Okay.
They always rattled.
Okay. So was there any motivation from previous crankbaits that kind of like helped innovate the DT series?
Yeah. The fat wrap was a real surprise. I remember talking with Larry Nixon at length when he was guiding down in Texas, I think in his early days, that the fat wrap number 5 was his go-to crankbait of all other baits. He understood balsa. Larry's a sharp guy, and he gravitated to that specific bait. And of course, guys tweaked and modified for their color, water, and where they were, or whatever. But that was it. And then the Ristos. Ristos, I've heard so many different stories about what went wrong. From, well, we never should have put a fishing lure back then in a pink box because anglers wouldn't buy a pink box.
Risto wrap.
Yep.
I'm looking it up. See if I can find any. Oh yeah.
And they were like a shad wrap. The basic intent of design, it was a shad wrap on steroids, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
A little stretched, not real bulbous, but more of an inline bait. And the lip, from what I had heard, is there were some issues with lips that got put in baits incorrectly or the wrong size or something. But nonetheless, it was a great bait, and there were some great colors. And that Fritz had some input on those right from the beginning. And but the DT's hands down. The 10 is, you can fire that thing further than you can fire most crankbaits. 16's phenomenal action. The 6 is, as Fritz said, when that was done, Fritz said, this is the best milfoil bait there is in a crankbait because it'll come through, and you look at where the lip comes out, and that's the big deal. It's those little things. More of an angle, less of an angle, no angle. DT 16 straight out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've caught some fish on that 16. One of my favorites. Well, and I feel like I don't know that it was entirely necessary to have every bait in all those sizes, and I do. Maybe it's my OCG collector side, the junkie. But I mean, you still. I think what you have with that series is the confidence of knowing where your bait is roughly, and you can look at a graph. You're able to put pieces of the puzzle together. Now, we don't know exactly if the 14 was running at 14, and obviously the type of line you had on affected your different depths. Correct. There was combinations, but ultimately you were able to put more pieces of the puzzle together that allowed you to be more consistent.
Yes,
and I think that was one of the most valuable parts. Is one of the most valuable parts to that line.
Well, yeah, you go along with. In those days, with a flasher or paper graph, and you'd spot your fish sitting on the edge of a weed line. Weed line stops at 12. The fish are down at 10. I think I'll throw 10.
Yeah, I think I'll throw 10.
I mean, it was pretty. Take the hand, put it on the bait, and you're going to have some success. And the concept was a good one. The concept was a great one. Fritz had that forever. DT stood for down. Or DT was
Dives 2.
Mm-hmm. But also Fritz's initials are David Thomas. Mm. So it was like, okay, Fritz, which one are you telling us?
That guy did so much for crankbait fishing.
Oh,
I think he was, I don't remember exactly. I think he was with Luz when he came out with that crankbait rod series.
Yes.
And that was my exposure to that. I think that was the technique specific world of rods and reels really started to make sense with a crankbait rod.
Yeah.
And I was again, like I told you, I was a junkie with the DTs and was really starting to figure out how to use those, but that changed so much. So I spent a good deal of time at Fort Dodge, Iowa, and right down the road from Fort Dodge is a lake called Brushy Creek.
Okay.
Brushy Creek is a standing timber lake. It's full of trees, and it's not conducive for a crankbait. At least we thought. And when we started doing well, Jeremy and I, a good buddy of mine, we started throwing crankbaits through the trees, and we just committed to going in and getting them when they get hung up. But if you had like a slender, no more than 12-pound fluorocarbon, and even 10 sometimes, and you had a soft rod, you had that parabolic bend and a glass rod, you could feel that bait kind of rise up on the backside of a stick. So if that line is coming over a limb, you can feel the tension change in the bait. And so you just naturally, okay, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to let that bait kind of float over and bring it down. Now, we still got stuck. Right, that was a part of it, but we started catching fish hand over fist in that lake because those bass would suspend in the trees.
Right.
But that combination of a slow reel, sensitive fluorocarbon, and a parabolic rod that I had a lose rod that was a David Fritz crankbait series, taught me how to work all those treble hooks through standing timber.
Totally.
It was a combination that you had to make it work.
Fritz was all about the system. Mm-hmm. He always spoke about the system, the reel, speed of the reel, the line, and the rod. And I still fish those rods. I still have them.
I still have one.
It's a deal. It's a parabolic load, as you said, fiberglass. And he goes, one just blew on it. And it's like you believed him because that's all he had in his hand every day virtually of his career was a crankbait rod. I asked him for a jig one time. I was going to flip behind him on beaver. And I said, David, you got any flipping jigs in here? First thing he says, yeah, Denny Brower done give me one once. I think it's in that box behind you. I went in there. I go, where's the hypo and the tetanus shot needle? I don't have to give this fish.
Covered in rust.
If I stick them. Yeah, it was totally rusted.
So the true story, you're right. He could tell if they breathe on it.
He would.
So I believe this, and I can almost prove it. I'd have to take you. We'd have to go to, for me to really prove it. I don't know how to explain it very well, but you can tell when a fish is following.
You can feel the lift.
You can feel the lift.
You feel it.
And I feel like the combination for me was a DT10 with 10-pound fluorocarbon. The reason I picked 10 is because I can get to a running depth faster with a smaller line. And here in Minnesota, we're not going to break 10-pound tests on a bass.
No.
But you literally could feel the fish tracking the bait. And I don't think you'd feel that with a stiffer rod. You got to have that parabolic bend.
You would feel the push before the suck.
Mm-hmm.
Hands down. Because you got used to fishing that rod.
Mm-hmm.
Because you were throwing that rod in cranking time of year or on a specific lake where you could catch them on a crankbait. You got familiar with that system that he was talking about.
Mm-hmm. And it changed a lot of how I fished at the different.
Yeah.
In fact, when we went to Alabama, of course, I got humbled quickly. I thought I knew how to catch a bass when I got down there and fished with those guys, and then I got schooled. But it played there as well. When we were able to locate fish on the ledges during ledge season, they were very susceptible to a crankbait. And
correct.
The largemouth, I think, down there were more inclined to eat, and the spots were more inclined to follow before they ate. And so you might be able to figure out, wasn't 100%, but I felt like that felt like a spot. You might get a closed mouth bump, and if the big largemouth came in, they just ate the thing. But
there's no greater feeling cranking when it just kind of goes no vibration
and loads up.
Oh, jeez.
And
it's big ones that do that.
I think you'd agree. There's something special about setting the hook on a jig that just feels so good. But to me, my favorite bite is a crankbait.
Absolutely.
Always love that.
That absence of nothing just before. Yeah.
Let's get back to your time at Rapala. Yeah. We're closing in on 2 hours, which is fine, and we would do 4. I don't care. And maybe we got to do a part 2 with this, but I want to get more about your time there.
Sure.
And I think we'd all agree if you work in this industry, work in the business, there are elements that become work, but ultimately you're working with your passion. You're working to further your passion and other people's passion. So the work side of it doesn't hurt as bad, I guess, if you will, or you don't think about it as work. So did your entire career, did that stay the same for you, or did there come a point in time where you're like, this is too much or more work than I had expected, or how did that?
It just, I always thirsted for more, just like when you get on a lead of something, you just become completely just frazzled, and you just are completely engulfed in it. immersed in it, however you want to say it, and you start to be studying more. You find yourself thinking about it more. And I lived my life during the days of doing full-time product development with Rapala, where it was not uncommon for me to wake up in the middle of the night with an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I was constantly troubleshooting, and I kept a notepad on the nightstand with a pencil. I'd get up, I'd sketch something. I would problem solve with bullet points, whatever it took. I always said my best days working, coming up with a project, finalizing or troubleshooting, was Highway 169, because the traffic from my house in that hours period of time was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible, but I problem solved because I could get all my frustrations out, and then you'd hit this calming period. Your mind, I swear, your mind opens up, and all of a sudden, dang, that's what we got to do. So then I'd get to the office, because I always would get in there early. I had, everything I needed in my office to whittle and putz and start tweaking and modifying.
I had some friends way back in the day that they said, "Well, I would never make my passion my career because it would ruin my passion." And I was kind of taken aback by that, and I didn't listen to that necessarily because I knew what I wanted to do. But
Yeah.
I'm curious if you feel the same way. I have found that my passion for fishing and hunting has only been enhanced by working in these industries.
It does, because you hear so many things that you had never heard before or thought of before. But it's that, like I said earlier, that one thing, you just take it away from a conversation with a guy, and you've got to go to apply it.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you know you're really hooked. If you're willing to accept that somebody can do something a little bit better than you can't be foolish
Mm-hmm.
and not try it.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to try it.
Always be willing to learn.
It's fascinating.
And I think that's what fishing is fascinating, because I don't know that you can ever learn it all.
Yeah.
And if you think you have, maybe it's time to hang it up. But like I love the opportunity to learn something new.
Yeah. I can tell you I retired, but I was never done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still never done. And it's just one of those things. It's not because I'm a creature of habit. That's just the way I'm wired. It's just, you're always thinking, well, what if you did this? And I can't pick up something, a screwdriver, anything, and look at it and go, so you're satisfied with that? Isn't there something more? I mean, how do we think the Leatherman tool came to be? Somebody just went, there's got to be a better mousetrap.
Got to be a better way.
Yeah.
So how many years were you at Rapala?
20. And then 15 years on the promotional program. So it was a good ride.
What would be, pick out one of your, I guess, your proudest elements, or the an accomplishment that meant the most during that time?
The X-Wrap. That's when Yarmo came over, again, Lori Rapala's grandson.
Mm-hmm.
And Yarmo came over, and we worked together on this project. It was originally going to be called, the project name was different than X-Wrap. It got the name X-Wrap because we were working on Project X. That's how that all started.
Okay.
We weren't going to tell anybody, because then there was going to be no way that something could leak out, because the sales guys always wanted something. We got to tease. I'm going down to Bass Pro Shop. We got to tease them about what, Yarmo had a product development, and he'd go, well, we have things in the work. We don't say anything. And, but anyways, we worked on that thing over a year. And by the time we got done with it, it had everything in it he was looking for. And we had the tweaking, we had the rocking, we had the cuts. It was quick, it was crisp. It was a great bait. And I said, maybe we should put a tail on this, a feathered tail. Really just because the X-Wrap or the, yep, there you go. What am I trying to say? Our other jerk bait, Husky Jerk, did not have a feather because that was going to be a multi-species lure. Well, the X-Wrap we were making discernibly for bass fishing because we needed to break that Mason-Dixon line deal. And it was like, if we're going to do it, we got to make it look like some of the others, take some elements. We're not going to knock anybody off, but we're going to take some elements here and there. And one day Jarmo walked into my office. He said, I got a call from Finland. Now, they're 8 hours ahead of us. I said, oh, okay. So what's going on? He goes, I'll never forget this. He was pretty much stone-faced most of the time for his age. And he says, they want to know what we want to do with Project X. And I said, well, what do you think? He goes, no, what do you think? And I went, Jarmo, this is your animal, buddy. He goes, no, this has turned into yours. And I said, it's ours. So what are you asking? The factory wants to know if we're done with it and it can go into production. You call them.
That's heavy.
Oh, I'm almost teared up thinking about it. And it was one of the biggest releases we ever made. I mean, it was just huge.
I've caught some
and
fish.
It got over quick. It just got out there and got big. Yeah, it was cool.
Catch a lot of fish on Mille Lacs with that thing.
Oh,
They love that. For some reason, the pink X-Wrap on Mille Lacs is shouldn't say that. It's a dynamite lure.
it's okay.
Man.
No, it's a great bait, and when you get that, well, yeah, it makes you feel great, but it also humbles you that it's like, yeah, you just do it again, and it's hard.
The X-Wrap to me kind of, it's a particular bait, but it's kind of like created the category of, I think a lot of people would have a similar bait that's not a Rapala X-Wrap, and they call it an X-Wrap because it kind of has that overarching. It's a small bass jerk bait, feather on the tail, and there's knockoffs. And when you get knockoffs, that means you did something right.
Always.
But to me, that's almost like a family of baits.
Yeah, it was a good bait. It still is a good bait, and it's one that will continue. It just will. There'll be others that will come from Rapala. There'll be others that'll come from other companies that are great. But yeah, that turned out. It wasn't to satisfy me personally. It was that whole bait was built just to fill that void with everything we could conceivably think of that we could put into a bait. And then we threw it to our engineers in Finland at the factory. Those guys are a bunch of wizards, because, I would send sketches, or I would physically take a piece of cedar because it's a little more easier to work with to make up hand samples. And I would get reasonable action samples. I'd make them by hand, seal them up, and we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun.
I'll bet you got a pretty cool collection of keepsakes.
Yeah.
In your man cave somewhere.
Yeah, they're there. Some of them, I just left behind, It's weird. Weird when you think about it. You're so in it, and then the next day you don't even go to the building. You don't even go out to the garage in your Suburban and take off.
So what do you do with your time now?
I fish like an animal.
Yeah.
I do. I fish hard. I love the outdoors in any shape or form. I love mowing the lawn. I never used to.
I'm worried about that. My dad, golly, he took so good care of his yard, and I was like, I'm never going to do this. Like right now, my son mows it. That's how much I hate it.
But I live in the woods, cut trees, split them, stack them. I love doing manual finger banging stuff. You know, I just all of it. Yeah. And in the summer, it's just, well, I'll go fish a lake today. I'll go up fish a river. My wife goes with me, and we'll take off and go up to Rainy for 4 days. I'll call up Falls Motel. Kelly, can you got a room up there? Yeah. And we run up there, go over and see Matt on Campfire Island and on the Canadian side and stay there. Or we run down to Wabasha, call up our friends that have a motel down there, and we're coming down for 4 days. And that's pretty much summer through fall till it ices up. Mm-hmm. We're just moving. Mm-hmm. Got a blaster and I got a John boat. So, yeah. You know, put one in storage and keep the other one ready to go at drop of a hat.
But you're not drilling holes in the ice as much anymore.
I don't drill anymore.
I understand it. I do.
I loved it. I mean, I loved it. I went out with Gens and a bunch of characters, and it was a lot of fun.
It wears you down, though. See, I've always looked at ice fishing as a survival mechanism for the winters in Minnesota. Like, you do it to get through the winter. And my son right now is ate up with it. He goes all the time. He and his buddies were out last night to take advantage of the last day of the season. Sure. So they were out. But I get it. Like, there's a point where you're like, you know, I just don't want to do that today.
I hear you. I learned so much about bass fishing, ice fishing. Mm-hmm. I will say that. You learn about how fish move, how they come in and approach a bait, what can trigger them. Sometimes it's not action, it's less action, no action. Colors. Colors were a big one. The year I had success on Minnetonka in that Shelby tournament back in '94, that's a great. You'll like this. You'll like this one. I'm nervous as hell. I have patterns going on Minnetonka Lake. It was scary, and I always said I can win this thing if the grass stays alive to go into the month of September when that tournament would be, and it was $50,000. Mm-hmm. And one year we had it, and a very dear friend of mine walked up to me and he said, "You're going to take this one, aren't you?" And I go, I think I could. I don't know. If the fish cooperate, yeah, they do. So I am nervous for like a week over practice, and it's consistent.
And this was September.
Yeah, and it's consistent. Throwing a 1 ounce white jig. And this is a true story. And so I'm home the night before the tournament. 3 days before the tournament, I got on this deal. White on white trailer with a white jig. And the fish were bigger that I was catching. Same spots, you know, black, blue, green pumpkin, whatever. I threw the gamut in there, sunfish patterns. No, they like this white stuff. I went around, I swear, to every tackle store in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and I ran the gamut, looking for white trailers I could put on a jig. The day before the tournament, I've got all these baits sitting on my deck in my garage. Everything was tied. I'm all set to go. If I could fall asleep. So I'm in the house trying to fall asleep, and I'm thinking, oh, did I plug in the charger? Well, you know that's the first thing you do when you back the boat in. You always do it. So I get out of bed. I got to go look and see if I plugged in. Go downstairs. I check the extension cord. It's going right to the walls. Plugged in. Went back in the house, turned the lights off. And I thought, was it really plugged in? I'm thinking, just go to bed. Get a hammer, something. Go to sleep. And I opened up the garage door. I stepped out. Before I turned the light on, peripheral vision caught my whole deck, and it was glowing. In with the white bags of plastics I bought were some old LaRue's glow craws.
The glow.
and I went ice fishing. When I can't get them, I would always throw. I used to get from Vados some of these double secret, totally illegal red glow paint that wherever they got this pigment. And that just stepped up the ice fishing. Next morning I started the day out. Same weight, 1 ounce jig, but with the glow LaRue craw. 2 glass rattles shoved it in the eyeballs, and that was it.
That was the deal.
That was the deal. They bit glow way over they bit white, biting white for the trailer. It was the weirdest thing.
So that time of year, I mean, you probably got some type of algae bloom going on, right? I mean, the grass is full. You've got just a lot of goo in the water in general.
Right.
I mean, but they were deep.
In some places, but what I found out I was catching were fish that were sitting on top of the milfoil. The bigger fish were sitting on top of the milfoil and running with those little emerald clear minnows that still today I don't know what the name is, but they were running the top almost like a fry ball. It would just be a school of them. They'd just zip, zip, zip around, and then they'd hover over these holes, and then they'd dart over to cover. And I thought, so they're exposing themselves, and they're darting back for cover. I can do that. So I was flipped it. The first time I did it, I caught like a 4-pounder. I just flipped out, and I flipped out. That 1 ounce is heading to the bottom quick, and I snapped it once and started popping back to the boat.
Like those darting schools of fish.
And that was it.
Ugh.
So I went back and I took all of my flipping sticks and I cut 3 inches off the ends of them and glued new tip tops on for the next day. It was just bad. 7.6 Daiwa flipping sticks back then.
So did you win?
Yeah. It was cool.
You know, you don't have those days all that often.
No, you don't.
And I think that if you can really zero in on what's happening and make the right decisions. I haven't won a real big tournament. I think there's been 1 or 2 that I'm like proud of that were big, you know, for the local level, decent money. Not here in Minnesota, but in Iowa. But like it's like so seldom do you get that dialed into a bite, and you know it's going to work. You know it's the right bite. You're on the right fish, and you know you just get a couple opportunities in life. I feel like to fish a tournament where you can launch your boat, being like, "All these jokers are paying me today."
Oh yeah, I was accused of chumming with frogs because on the way to the tournament, no kidding,
Chumming with.
I almost crashed my truck and trailer. I was going down the highway, and there was a migration of frogs, as you've seen.
Yes. Yep.
People spend too much time in the outdoors, see it. And I went through that slick mass of frogs, and the whole bottom of my White Ranger was full of frog parts.
Yeah.
And so it was, well, yeah, you sit on a spot long enough, the water starts to, yeah, right, and the frog parts start dry up. It's like really.
They got to find something to blame it on. You just beat them.
It was just weird.
All right, well let's close it up here with a little bit of advice. You know, we talked when we started. We talked about legacy and how important that
Sure.
is. And I guess let's give advice to both groups. You start with giving advice to the younger generation, and then finish it up with advice to the outgoing generations. Like how legacy is important and how important it is to keep that intact as you either retire or go on. But let's start with the youth.
Yeah, I think running with the old Boy Scout. I wasn't a Boy Scout, but running with the old adage of you always leave a campsite the way you found it, I think is no matter. And I'm throwing this out because of technology. And I did the same thing. I bought forward-facing sonar because I've got to try and keep up with everything and understand these things. And yeah, it's just. Being a good angler isn't always about catching fish. It's networking. It's finding causes to get behind, to support. It's just being a good citizen, I think, is a big thing. And in our day, in our time period right now, I think it becomes more difficult. It certainly does because we seem to gravitate and polarize ourselves so quickly. Technology is good. I don't want to see legislation to outlaw technology. We can't have that. We can't have that. That's wrong. It's people that don't understand become frightened. When they become frightened, they go against things. You have to learn. You have to do a better job. You have to try to learn as much as you can before you make a decision. Have respect for fellow anglers is rule number one. You're always sharing water, I think, is a big thing. Those are the things I run with. I quit fishing docks because I used to get all wrapped around the axle with somebody telling me I couldn't fish on a dock, and I couldn't comprehend. But that wasn't good on my part. So I just made a rule to myself, there's more spots out there deep. Just stay deep. That's what you should do. But I don't know. It's for the future, it's protect the resource. We share the resource with other boaters and water users in so many different ways. Leave it like you found it and try and help somebody. Give back to the sport. There's something that's extremely satisfying about doing well or being recognized for doing well in what you love to do. Nobody fishes because they have to. You fish because you want to. And typically that's passion. There's not a good angler that I know that didn't start because they got a gravitational pull and it just consumed them. Once you get consumed, you got to figure out, how am I going to deal with this? And just be yourself. Ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but don't be afraid to help others that are trying to get to you, because you have no idea. And remember this one. You have no idea who was at the ramp the same day you were that morning. You can never know. And I can tell you so many times it's come back to be a positive. Something you did. You helped somebody. You just anything. You can't imagine who are at the ramps. And for us older guys, it's go out and try and find somebody to take fishing. That's your assignment for life. You always have to get somebody else involved, or try to. And get rid of that equipment that's sitting in the garage or the pole barn. Pass it along. Don't keep it in a box. I'll guarantee you, I don't know anybody who's taking it with. So, yeah. And I truly like to thank all the old barnstormers who got us all to this position, that where you still enjoy to go out and do what you're doing, and I look forward to it every day. And it's the little things about fishing that I learned. You learn so many different things from so many guys. Allow yourselves to get that exposure. Position yourself by being a good person. Then you become someone others want to hang around with. And when they be comfortable with you, you'll be surprised how much info you can get about just doing simple things. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I'd do it all over, like I said. Every single thing I'd do all over again. It's just great. Fishing is the bomb. It truly is. Thanks for the opportunity, buddy.
Mark Fischer, I'm glad we did this.
This was fun.
And I don't think this will be the last one. We'll get together on another topic, but this is I'm fascinated by guys like you. Your generation essentially created the sport that helps pay my bills and gives me something to connect to God with and with my family, and I can't imagine a life without it. I mean, so thank you for being who you are.
It's always good. It's fun.
It is fun. It's the right way to live as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah.
I can't imagine life without it. And some of the friends I've made along the way, you can't put a price on the relationships. You literally can't put a price on it.
And they're forever. I still get together with the same goofballs that I started fishing with back in the late 80s.
I've heard some stories.
Oh, yeah. We get together and celebrate Christmas, and no, I run with a well-oiled group of characters. Characters aren't bad.
Nope, there's a lot of stories to be told, and I might need a list of those characters at some point here. So, thanks for making the drive up here.
Thanks for the opportunity to do this. I love it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Fischer, thanks for being here. You're listening to an In-Fisherman Storyline. I'm Thomas Allen. We'll see you here on the next one.